Our next contest for the Better Photography Weekly Challenge is Creative Blurs. Our mentor and judge is Chandni Gajria. A self-taught artist and a writer residing in Bombay, Chani uses photographs and text in the form of prose to explore personal narratives that are informed by her struggles, trauma, anxieties, and experiences. Her work is autobiographical, while her approach is conceptual in nature. Through her projects, Chandni aims to uncover her own psychological and emotional layers. Her ongoing series on her body look at the female body as an overused machine. Apart from this, she has also worked as a writer with Better Photography magazine and later on freelance as a commercial photographer for Platform magazine, the CEO Lounge magazine, Lakme Fashion Week, and recently Netflix. Hi Chandni.
Hello, thank you for the introduction. All right. Okay. So, creative blurs is a fascinating, I think, subject to kind of look at when we talk about photography. A lot of artists have attempted and incorporated blurs in their work, and I think with my presentation, what I'm trying to do, or what I'm going to try to do, is to kind of introduce you to a few artists who have successfully done that and very seamlessly done that, so that you don't look at it as a blurry photograph. So that is my intention. So let's start with Prabuddha Das Gupta. I think one of the first photographer artists whose work I, got fascinated with, and whose work I saw and wanted to be a photographer. And this particular work, Longing, is one of my favorite works. It's what got me into photography. The language that he used in this work is just something out of this world, something really, really incredible. He photographed his then girlfriend Lakshmi in very intimate, setting. It was his personal relationship that he was bringing to the foreground for the audiences to see. Like in an image like this, you see the girl, the woman, looking into the camera, and you kind of have this feeling that she's looking at you, looking at the photographer behind the camera, looking at Prabuddha. And but the focus is on those flowers, on the side. So when you talk about blurring, or when you talk about blur, the the exact meaning is what you can't see, but there's also the uh, glass half empty, half full sort of a phenomenon, right? What you can't see, but what is visible is also important. So when you're blurring something, or when you choose to kind of put your focus somewhere else, what are you showing to the audience, or where is your eye leading to? This becomes technical, but this becomes a little technical when I say it like this. But when you're looking at an image like this, it's so fragile, it's so poetic, it is so, there, it is so present. So Prabuddha had this way of doing with his work, photographing these mundane things and making them look uh, so poetic, and making them sort of taking you into another dreamscape, if I may say so. So this particular work is something that has immensely inspired me as well, in my initial years. Prabuddha's pictures disorient the person looking at them. And yeah, this particular quote by Dyer is something very interesting, and it talks about his work, Longing, talking about that you're never really sure of whose dreams you are in, and that's what this entire body of work does to the viewer. And if you ever manage to get a copy of this, or are able to see it online, I would urge you to kind of just take a look at the work, spend some time with it. It's certainly something that will grow on you over time. because initially you might just be taken aback with the kind of language, the photography language and the visual language that is being used in his work. But it's certainly something that you start seeing around you when you start taking your camera everywhere, because this entire work has been literally, in and around him, and really tells you that what what do you choose to photograph and how you choose to photograph it can really tell you the kind of person you are. So that's Prabhuddha. This is Jeff Jacobson, and this particular book of his, The Last Role, was when he was diagnosed with cancer, and he sort of, went about taking this compelling body of photographs in a very nuanced manner, and this sort of also gives you a depiction of a cancer patient's changing perspective of life around him, because he literally like decided that I don't know about my life or of my death, and I'm going to take these photographs in this last roll of Kodachrome that I have. So the images are very poetic, and the use of color is such. You have this loneliness sort of, spread across these photographs. The palette also is very soft focused, and there is a reflection on the beauty and mortality sort of a concept. I don't know, I don't want to call it a concept, but there is this whole thing about what is mortality, and sort of questioning that idea of life and death from the perspective of a photographer. Sarah Moon is another fascinating artist, if I may say so. And she was, she was this young fashion model in Paris, and in the 1960s. And she also enjoyed photographing her friends, photographing people she met in and around her fashion circle. And this sort of style became such a unique signature of her work. She started creating images that were soft, that were romantic, and nobody in the fashion world was creating work like this, using colors like this, and focusing on the very feminine, non-sexual non-sexual manner of photographing a woman. That came first with Sarah Moon, and she really wanted to sort of bring in this dream fantasy sort of a sort of a dream fantasy like touch to her images that you can see. And if you look at this particular image, it reminds me of even Ren Hang's work, which is not blurry. Ren Hang's work is more of use of flash. There's one particular image of Ren Hang which is very prominent, and if you've not seen his work, I must urge you to see that as well, see his work as well. Unfortunately, he is no more. And his work is not related to blur at all, but just to sort of give you a reference of what one artist can lead you to. So the color palettes, the way the motion is, what the artist is focusing on, what are they trying to say, even with the blur, portraying a woman's lips and the color and the red of the lips and the red of the nails. So all of that kind of matters in blurs, or whenever you're trying to do motion blur, because the image is not sharp anymore. So you have to think about texture, the color, the composition. It's such a tight frame. So, this easily could have been a complete portrait of a person, but it leaves a lot to imagination as well. So yeah. I think of color as more of a common language, more generous, more open, not transposed, the language of the real. We come to Van Gogh's images. Um, I chose Van Gogh because, I mean, his work is is a lot about color, and there is this way of his brush strokes that he used, and even the colors that he used were very symbolic. You know, the blues he used were very prominent, the yellows he used were very prominent, and his images, his paintings sort of give you the sense of a movement, you know. This famous painting of his, The Starry Night, is, I'm sure like a lot of people have seen this work, but like it would be very interesting to understand the symbolism between the blues he used and the way he used his brush strokes as well. And yeah, this also can kind of, looking at paintings is a great way to understand color and to kind of understand landscapes or the portraiture that the painters do. It's a very good study of composition as well. There's a lot of things you can take from a painting, and a lot of photographers, I think it's a great idea to pick up, you know, drawing skills or sketching skills if you want to get into photography. It's just an added way of expressionism. And yeah. Francis Bacon was, there's something about Francis Bacon's work. It's disturbing and it's unsettling, and there is something about his work that will make you squirm in your seat, I think. Um, he was himself a very complex person and a complex artist, and he would uh, he would love to distort, you know, the relatives he painted, sorry, and the people he painted. He would he would never want to show them the way they actually were, and he always wanted to bring his own element of um, I don't know, uneasiness in his paintings. So his work is something that you should definitely look at. There's this blurriness and this shift of movement and this shift of having two sides of a person in his work. So yeah. Gerhard Richter was a German artist, and a lot of his work came from making photorealistic, you know, paintings. His work was a lot dependent on his family albums and his photographs that he carried back. And so this particular one was of his Aunt Marianne, and the baby is actually Gerhard himself. And he he was oblivious to the fact at that moment when he painted this one in 1965, but later his aunt was actually killed by his own family links to the Nazis. His family was linked to the Nazis, and his aunt was unfortunately killed, you know, during that time, much later. But yeah, but there are a lot of these uh, paintings that he's done which have this photographic realism to it, and they are because he has painted them from photographs, but he has sort of washed them out with his brush strokes and sort of made them a little more blurry. It sort of feels very nostalgic to look at. You kind of have this feeling that this is a photograph, but it isn't. So it gives you that nostalgia. It gives you this idea of a long lost memory. So think of blurs in that way of the way things move you, or the way you remember things or what you're trying to say. And I think all these artists up till now that I've shown you kind of do that with the movement and with the blurs. They try to kind of um, dig their past or dig their memories or dig their inner thoughts with their work using blurs and using these strokes of movement. So coming to Adam Bloomberg and Oliver Shennan, they are two London-based artists, and they sort of combine documentary and journalistic work and present them in a very conceptual manner, in a very artistic manner. With this particular series called The Day Nobody Died, in 2008, uh, Adam and Oliver actually embedded themselves in the British Army during the war in Afghanistan. And they created these blurred images in response to the war that was happening around them. So uh, they carried around 76 by 600 centimeter long photographic paper in a light box, and then exposed the film during each incident that occurred during the days of their embedding in the British Army. And the work really questions your perception of the blur or the perception of the image itself. uh, for example, like, does your perception change when I show you these images and tell you that this actually was taken during a very violent day, you know, in the war? the does it do anything to you? Because that's what contextual response is, right? That's where the context of the image changes. By the look of it, they are just colorful, blurred images. But once I tell you that these are actually war images, what does that do to you? And how do you respond to these images? Um, the idea of this work also, I think, comes to kind of question the nature of the war. And the work itself doesn't show you any violence or doesn't represent any typical images of the war. It doesn't show you the soldiers, the battalion, doesn't show you blood. The red color in the images don't represent blood. They don't represent blood at all. They are just blurred images of something that the light has been exposed to, the film has been exposed to. And I think this work goes beyond the idea of blur and the idea of this motion blur. It kind of becomes more deep and more interesting to uncover. It's something that you should definitely read about, and also check out other works of Adam Bloomberg and Oliver Shennan. It's definitely something to kind of look at and kind of bring more depth to your work than just coming to our last artist, Lillian Bassman. She was born in Brooklyn, in New York, and she actually worked as a textile designer and a fashion illustrator before, working at Harper's Bazaar. And this was in 1946. And in 1949, she actually photographed her first Paris couture collection, and that led to her being distinguished as as a photographer, and kind of establishing herself in the photography circle. And she experimented a lot with the way she would print her images, often trying to experiment the materials on which she would print, and that would lend uh, illustrative um, a very illustrative quality to her images. So a lot of her other images, if you look at it and if you Google them and if you search through her work, um, there would be a lot of you would be confused whether they're illustrations or photographs. So that is something to look for in her work. But otherwise as well, she uh, also, like, a lot of her work, she destroyed herself because she didn't think they were up to the mark. And um, she was unhappy with them, and she destroyed a lot of her own negatives, in her later years. And she is the one to credit for bringing Richard Avedon into our lives, because she was the one who kind of showcased their work and kind of bring them to the limelight, when she was working at Harper's Bazaar. And yeah, a lot of black and white, grainy images, a lot of femininity and fragility in her work, similar to Sarah Moon, but still a very distinct style and a very signature style and very different visual language. There's this uh, quote that she, used to say. She said, "I'm completely tied up with softness, fragility, and the problems of a feminine world." And that femininity is very, very evident in her work. Yeah, so that's, I think, the end of the artists that I have to show you. But I wanted to also kind of give you a little bit of references of whose work you could kind of look at or read about to kind of understand movement. You have Harold Edgerton, who was one of the first and foremost pioneers in understanding Flash. And although Flash kind of makes you think of, like, if I'm using Flash, there won't be any blurs, but Harold Edgerton used strobes to create and to understand movement. And in his a lot of images, there is the blur and there is the repetition of this movement that you can see. And that's a history lesson for you over there. Sallyman's work, called Faces or What Remains, also uses long exposures, and that is something maybe you could look at. Shomai Tamatsu also has a lot of these dreamy landscape photographs, taken during the rush hour in Tokyo, taken of people, in his surroundings. That is something you should look at. Um, Olafur Eliasson is actually a site-specific sculptor artist. He creates these magnificent atmospherical installations. And although installations would not be something completely related directly to blurs, but I think it's a very great way to look at other art forms to kind of expand your photography senses also. It's good to kind of pause taking pictures and kind of see other works that could lend to your practice. So Olafur Eliasson, you definitely must. Painters, uh, Edward and Monet, you should definitely look at their work to understand color and texture and the way they used their strokes, or the way they had movement very, very evident in their paintings. Um, I personally love looking at or studying dance forms. I think it's a very, very interesting and a very important manner in which you can understand movement. And so there are a lot of pros, I feel, when you kind of expand to other art forms. Like I said, I have been fascinated with dance, and I personally love studying dance and kind of looking at choreography videos, especially of, ballet or like any particular dance form. I really enjoy watching contemporary dance choreography. Pina Bausch is someone you should look at. There is sort of a narration or a narrative in her work as well. Aditi Mangaldas' work, and she does contemporary Kathak, and it's beyond that as well. It's not just that form of dance, but there's also light and shadow, and the way uh, she uses lighting in her performances that kind of lend to this very dreamscape. You feel like you're in another world itself. So if you're able to kind of see some of their videos on YouTube, I think that's going to really kind of push you to kind of look at different forms and understand what different artists of different mediums do, and that can really have an effect of how you practice your work as well, and of course Astad Devo's work as well. So yeah, I think this is me with all my references and everything that I kind of look at or like study or kind of, you know, Google, for lack of a better word. But yeah, this is what I think would be a great way to start looking at or kind of seeping through, so that you elevate your own work, whether you shoot blurs or whether you shoot something else. But yeah, so yeah,
Thank you so much, Chandni.
thank you so much. I hope this helps to whoever is trying to submit to the contest. Try not to copy any of these works. I know that's very, very tempting, but try to inculcate uh, what these artists do. They don't just photograph blurs, but they also kind of put their soul in it. They also bring their own personal stories into their work. So try finding your own personal stories